Wow, there is cosmoline oozing out of every surface on this gun. There is Cosmo, look at that, yikes, there's Cosmo everywhere. So it's been cosmoline, but why was this gun in cosmoline? Well, that's weird. It's got this rare marking on it that you don't see too often. We flip it over and, oh, wait a minute. What is this? Is this some kind of fancy safety? No, this is normal and repeat. This is a Schnellführer, and we get the rare opportunity. This thing came drifting in the shop here, and the guy that owned it said, "Can you clean this while I'm here?" And of course, I'm going to clean it. So we're blasting off a quick episode here that's going to show us the inside of this thing and how this little gizmo works. Maybe we'll get it outside and shoot it. I think that'd be really cool. Let's go down a rabbit hole. This one's going to go by really fast. Get it? All right, so from this angle, we can see there's just glop all over the place. All right, mag well's empty. There's nothing in this thing. So what we do is we let the hammer down, leave the trigger back, and then the way this is supposed to come apart is you lift up on this tab here, and the whole gun slides apart this way. Now, we're going to switch camera angles because I don't want anything to come raining out of this. I'm going to set it down on a bench because you don't want to do this beginning gunsmiths over all this air down on the ground. And even though I've swept, I don't want to find out because I'll guarantee you parts for this gun do not exist. So as Bruno said, we think everything is trapped, but there's all kinds of extra little itty-bitty pieces in this thing. I can already see spring-loaded plungers located here. But the big thing I see is just, oh my God, look at the amount of Cosmo in this thing. Oh, it's that nasty, right after the war, sticky, disgusting. Wow. Just remember, cosmoline is a 4-letter word. Let's see if we can get a look down in there and see how much Cosmo's in there. Oh yeah, we're moving the light here. Oh, buddy. Yeah, look at that. Oh. Okay, so really what the owner wanted was, can you dig all the schmutz out of this thing for me and then relubricate it and we'll send it back out in the field. Cosmoline is an excellent storage medium. It's just a pain in the neck to get out of it. Milsurp collectors, as you're going along, you're going to see a lot less Cosmo because there are a lot fewer guns. Just, you got to give them a good cleaning, got to give them a good look underneath. All right, we're going to reset and have the camera come in over this shoulder because I'm right-handed and it just makes more sense to work that way. So in this device, the way this thing normally works is there's a disconnector right here. This is the disconnector. So ordinarily, this piece here gets pushed upwards. It gets pushed upwards, and that part that's moving right there is the sear, and this is where the sear notch is catching on the hammer. Now let me light that the right way. That black line right there is the difference between the full auto sear having it, and if you push this forward, that'll kick down onto that. You see it kick down? Now, this sear has control of it. So in a normal C96, the gun cocks, and it's cocked right here on this ledge, and when you pull the trigger, it'll push up on this. This will rotate up out of the way, and the hammer will come down. Well, in this particular setup, when we get the body of the gun back apart again, we're going to find out that that switch just jacks this thing out of the way, and then the gun is cocked. Watch that move. You ready? The gun is now cocked, and it cocks on this ledge down here. There's the hammer. There's the sear. So once that's the case, and the frame comes forward, the frame will come forward. That will run into that lock right there, and it will drop it. And I want to be very careful here because the mainspring is still loaded on this thing, and I really don't want to set this all over the place. I would really like to take this piece out, and I'm in here. Okay, and then I want to take this sear out, and then once I got that there, And if I pop this, you'll see this right over right there. You see it on watch? Right there. So that's it. That's what holds a cock. There's a honking mainspring in here that I'm being very respectful of, because one of the very things you do not want to do on AR-15s, 1911s, and a host of guns is to make this energy discharge into this frame, which it was never designed to absorb. So we'll bring that hammer all the way down. And then to take this back apart, you push in on this plunger and it falls apart. There's a lot written about how C96s come apart, and this is not the video you're going to get it from. So this spring here pushes on the sear. It also pushes on the rotary lock that we were undoing that holds the gun together. You can see that rotary lock right there. And if you push in on that, you can see that it's working the bottom. So go to the bottom of the coil spring and take a look, and you can see it actually bending a little bit. All right. These springs have a nauseating tendency to break, and I would be willing to bet you that the number of these springs that have this extension to hold that coil spring, to hold this full auto sear together, I can count in the world on my fist. So let's not be breaking that, shall we? There's only one screw in a C96, and this one, of course, has got rust all over the shank. So what we'll do here, we got Thor up to a rolling boil, and we're just going to drop this bucket in, drop the screw in there, and that's the way you take care of that. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this should be over here like this. Yeah. We'll let that boil for a little bit. Beginning gunsmiths, there is no kill like overkill. So if you're going to burn the watts I just burned to get that much water boiling, you might want to do the frame, the slide, and the action components with it. Something like that. Well, we've dug all the Cosmo off of this. And what I've done is I've isolated out the parts that are unique to this setup. We have a trigger with a spring-loaded paddle in the back of that, and that's what's going to keep this thing spring-loaded in a rotary direction. We've got the button that actuates this and its spring, so the lock, this is kept from rotating in a rotary motion and a linear motion by this. We've determined that the disconnector is a different shape than a standard disconnector on a C96. We have the trigger access pin sear spring unlocking access pin spring is different because it's got this little projection on here that bears up against the back of this spring, which bears up against this plunger, which keeps the full auto sear rotated up into the hammer. So the full auto sear is this way. And as you can see here, we have a notch there, and that's going to bear this way. So when the frame comes up and pushes this like that, this is free to come down. On an ordinary C96, the hammer, this lobe is much larger. The hammer is rotated in this way by a spring that's pushing right there. Okay? That's all up in the cassette. So this is different. That's different. Now, this, and we're going to take a B-roll picture of this because you can barely see it, but there's a cut here. And this cut feeds into a dovetail inside the frame. Down here, there's actually a dovetail cut here. And what it does is it captures this piece, and it prevents this piece from coming out. And what this does is when you slide this backwards, this locks the sear, the automatic sear, out of the way. So when you put the gun in single action, this will slide backwards because that right there is going to drive it. So as you rotate this into the R format, it's there, and this spring is allowed to rotate. And as you rotate this around this way, it shoves that stick out, pushes the auto sear out of the way, and prevents it from trapping the hammer. So it's a very positive system. It's either on or it's not on. And the last two things that are left are, this is a magazine release. Well, you don't typically have a magazine on a C96. And then this spring is shaped differently because this spring keeps this magazine release from falling out of the gun. It just fits down inside that slot that way. So instead of driving that out with a punch, what you have to do in order to rotate that out of the way is stick a punch in this hole and bend it backwards this way. I may be wrong here. You actually have to bend it that way to pop it out, then it slides out and it'll come. We'll put it all back together again. But these are the pieces that make the 96 unique. And then we have this machined piece of marveled excellence. Look at the amount of machining that they had to do in order to put all of the notches, holes, off-axis cuts. It's an incredible piece of machining. And then all this is, you put all the fire control parts in it and it slides into the housing. Hang on a second here, I got it a little bit off. There we go. So there's a cut here that this feeds down over, that sits in on, and then it feeds into that cut. So the whole thing just slides up inside the gun, and it's all held together by the interaction of I wouldn't say precisely cut parts, but I would say well thought out cuts. Everything in this gun does what it's supposed to do. We fired up Thor to get the schmutz off the screw, and we did, and that's the only screw in the entire gun. The rest of it is just a standard Broomhandle Mauser. The firing pin return spring has to be put on the right way. If you put the firing pin return spring on, this will wind up onto this shank and become a smooth part of it. So I don't know if we're showing this. I'll unwind the firing pin from it, wind the firing pin back up. This is the spring that retracts the firing pin off the primer so that everything else has to work. That's a pretty unique feature of a 96. The bolt on the gun, and this is, I'm going to call it an upper for lack of a better term, but this is actually the frame. So when that's in and the bolt is down, these locking pieces right here have pivoted down and they have locked the bolt together. Now when the frame comes to the rear, this is driven down and that allows the bolt to come out, and that's how the gun locks. This is essentially the grooves cut in the top of the 1911 do the same thing, except that the entire barrel moves. It's a different way to do the same thing, but that's how the gun locks. Now, this particular projection down here on the bottom is actually being hooked into in such a way that this is being pressed. Let's see, this goes to the rear, right? Yes. This is actually being pressed in a way that it's trying to lock all the time, and it has to be unlocked in order for it to work. So all of that interrelates, and it couples up when you slide the cassette in the bottom of the gun. So I've got this thing laid out on a bench in groups here, okay? I've got it laid out in groups. We've got the barrel extension and barrel, which is what this is actually called. I looked up the correct terminology for it. It's barrel extension. Bolt. This is the recoil spring retention lug, which holds it in the frame. So this is going to be a final assembly part. We really don't care about the hammer or whatever here. All right. So there's a couple things we got to do first. You've got to, you're at a decision point. Do I oil all of this and then try to put it back together again with greasy hands? Well, some guns you can't get to. So Bruno's Model 40, that whole thing got slathered before we put that together because we weren't going to be able to get in there. Model 8s, Model 81s, another gun. This particular one, though, appears to be very accessible. The only thing we're going to put a little bit of oil on before we begin here is going to be things that we can't get to, like the underside of the extractor. This extractor fits, you can see the two shiny surfaces there. It fits up inside here like this. And then these two little bulbous extensions will have to be lifted over and put into here. And I'm going to tell you, lift these extensions the least amount you have to. So I'm I'm going to try it this way. I'm going to pick up on this, and as I'm picking up on it, I'm just going to tap it backwards with a hammer. Almost got it. And as you can see, I'm not killing it with this hammer. I'm just banging. It's down in, right? Don't flex these. This is probably the most commonly broken part on a 96, is these extractors will just tell you to go screw yourself. And we don't want to do that. Okay, so that's down. Then the aforementioned firing pin, we're going to go ahead and screw the firing pin retraction spring up on that the correct manner. Remember how that worked, right? Okay, so that's there, that's there. The recoil spring will be loaded into the back end of this like that. So the recoil spring attacks this way. See? Just set that in there to get it out of the way. What we're trying to do right now is get parts count on a bench to drop down a little bit. We've got all these pieces parts. We want to reduce all this clutter. All right. Now we're going to put the rear sight on. And the rear sight, this is that used motor oil ATF stuff we've got. And I'm just getting up underneath the sight. And I'm getting up underneath the parts here that are going to have to move, that we're not going to be able to get to when the weapon is assembled. Here we go. We're there. I'm going to blow this out. That's the correct amount of remaining oil. Let's give it a good toof and be done with it. That is an epic spring right there. So what goes on is there's a milling cut in here, just like on a Mauser rifle. There's a mill, and then that can pop up. So it takes not an insignificant amount of force to slide this down. And ordinarily I would hang on to this in a vise, but I don't want to reposition the camera. Or we can come up on top of the vise and do this the right way. The universal work holding system will save your butt every time. All right, so I'm going to get a wooden hammer handle. And now I can grab the top of the hammer handle with my fingers like this. And I can really come down on this thing and possibly tap on the back end of it with another hammer here. I'm going to get my rubber handled hammer here. Back this light out of the way so I don't kill myself. Okay. Okay, do you see that? Boom, and we're there, right? Tangent rear, because we have a shoulder stock. Now, this is rather optimistically calibrated to 1,000 meters. Yeah, you go ahead and do that and time your time the time of bullet flight with the minute hand on your watch. So that window in the side, this is going to reach up inside there, and then the spring tension is going to push this to the rear. So you see right there now, that's the rear end of the firing pin right there. The recoil spring is retained by this, and the firing pin's rear bearing is this block. So that's what we're trying to do here. So one of the problems is going to be figuring out how to get this thing up in front of this block, because this has to go up in front of the block. And as you can see, the spring will just make that snap to the rear. So we'll do that. This will get loaded in here. And again, we have the opportunity to deep down, we're just going to give it a little run of oil on the spots that we know it's going to run on. Just a little bit. Okay. That's going to go in there. And this is going to sit down there. And okay, so I take a screwdriver and just stick that down in there like that, and that'll come in and stick. So now we got that spring loaded. I will tell you guys something. When I'm doing a video like this, we truncate off my mistakes, because some people are using this as an assembly procedure, and you don't need to be trying to keep track of where I went, the dead ends I went down. So there's some edits in this, because I'm only trying to show you the way that works. Don't think I'm a Broomhandle Mauser maven, because I'm going to tell you what, the number of these I have ever worked on is one, the full auto part. So when we're done, this slot is vertical. This is firing pin protrusion, right? Hang on a minute. Right there. That's a pretty stiff spring in there, but that means that the firing pin is retracted and it's just barely beyond flush here if you're looking at it. It's barely beyond flush, and that is enough for the hammer to come down and hit this. And it's not really how hard you hit it, it's the time rate of rise of the force on the face of the percussion cap, the primer, if you will. So there we go now. The barrel extension and upper are all assembled, and this whole thing can just sit here like this until we're ready to go further. I think I have this order figured out. So this device comes through, so you see the slot in the frame? That goes through there, rotates to there, and then before you rotate it up, you bring it all the way around like this, and we put the aforementioned T-slot. We're going to throw some oil down in that T-slot because we may not get it in there. And then this hooked part right here is going to hook on the underside of that device, just like we saw before. Okay, so that's going to slide. You can see this T-slot right here, right? So what we're doing is we're driving it like this. So if you roll that back down in there and grab it with the extension, boom, right there. When you rotate this handle, you're rotating this sear block right here. So now we got that in, right? So now we're going to roll this up, and we're going to look, and there is a slot in here. This has a screwdriver slot on top of it. You can see it right there. And it's got a little titty sticking down right there. So we'll put that spring on, and we'll roll this in, and I'll get my hands out of the way. This is the slot I'm trying to hit right here, the one on the bottom. Now I have to be careful because I just rolled this over and I lost my registration on that bottom pin, which has to be maintained. Okay, so that's what I'm aiming at. I'm trying to roll this over right there. So that's got to be lined up. So I'm telling myself that this pointer is pointing right at the edge of this cutout, and that this has to be put in so that it's lined up right there. And I'll get my finger out of the way here in a minute. The spring is having its way with me. There it is. So now once I got the spring to line up and stop pushing it, now I rotate this 90 degrees like that. And I'm not entirely positive that doesn't snap into something else here. Does that snap in? Yeah, right there. Okay, so there's a track up the inside, and when I rotated it 180 degrees, the part there that we had lined up comes around this way and snaps up into the track. So now this, when we're done, we want this button to pop out, allow us to go to normal or full, and then you see that slide is sliding in and out. Okay, so we got the frame almost together. We got one more thing we got to do now. We got to get the trigger in this thing, get the slide release in it. Okay, so we're back up on the vise. So up inside this thing, there is a spot here for the trigger pins to set right there and right there. So this will go in there so that the trigger pins set in that slot, just like that. Now, there is some spring tension on this, but that's merely for what else it's going to do here. This retention spring, we're going to set down in here and snap it over. Very difficult to show exactly what I'm doing here, but all right, well, I'm going to have to figure out a way to push down on this while I'm sliding this whole thing forwards. That whole thing's got to go forward. And I hate to tell you, there's no other way to do this than to put it in a vise. There's no way to show it to you. I will tell you that when you get here, it will be really obvious how this is supposed to work. The full auto sear goes in first, I think. Now I'm making this order up because We did rehearse this once, and it was a couple hours ago, and I don't remember. There we go. So this is the fully automatic sear, and that little sliding plunger that we put in with the T pushes like that in order to hold it out of engagement. So that will sit up that way, and then when the frame comes shut, that'll trip it, okay? We've learned a couple of things. This spring, this is actually a round tunnel, and that has to slide up inside there like that, all right? So then the hammer, this is another one that's going to be difficult. We got a boss right here, so we're just going to oil the boss and the notches, and we should be good to go here, right? This reverse surface right here needs to be lubricated, because this reverse surface right there is where most of the firing pin, where most of the hammer pressure is going to go. This will go in there, okay. Now it's a little tricky in here. That's going to go in. That's the hammer base pin, the hammer pivot. But you can't push this all the way down yet, because you got something else you got to get in there first. Hold on a minute. We'll just get some of that oil down inside the pivot. So in order to get this up in there, I'm going to rotate this around so that when I shoot this a little bitty spring out of here, I at least know where it went. That'll have to come up under here and get captured by that little prong in there. So now this spring is captured by the extension off the bottom of this, right? So a little bit of Earl in here. And now we've got a full auto sear that's being spring tested, and we can see that by, if we come all the way back, we'll watch that click in, right? Okay, we want to leave this down because we want the least amount of mainspring tension on it that we can get away with. A little bit of Earl here. Anvil Gunsmithing, investigating lubrication as a concept since 2016. Okay, that goes in there. So when we're done, we want to make sure that this top of this pin is actually touching this cutout part. So in we go all the way in, and it's got to be at an angle, and that comes all the way up. So now I'll roll that so that the light shines on it a little bit better. There we go. The sear comes in and drops down, and then we're going to set the lock and block down inside here. You got to put the sear in first because that lock and block will get in the way, but this is all kind of containerized. It's not going anywhere. The last thing we got to do here, not the last thing we got to do, we got to put the safety in. So the safety, you'll see there's a cam here, and the safety cam has to sit down in this hole. Hang on a minute, I'll get it all lined up. We're going to have to cock the hammer because you can see these surfaces getting out of the way. So we'll bring that up, and we've got that on the full auto sear. It's not being, this one isn't doing any work because it's not spring loaded yet. And we just don't want a non-spring loaded thing holding all this spring energy back. But that's there. That's got to go into, so hang on a minute, I got to turn the wrong way. That goes into this cavity here. So this has got to slip in here with that spring being told it doesn't want to do it. So we're going to make sure that the sear is all the way down so we have the least amount of distance. I'm going to push down on this and pop it up. And there's no way for you to see through my thumb, but we've got to get this to come up against that spring tension right there and pop into that hole. And I don't know if that's, you just got to have your thumb over it in order to pop it. Now, this is all kind of being held together, so don't tempt it. This comes up through this hole, and as you can see, the entire thing flexes. And that's the spring that holds the lock up. Now that you got all this together in one piece like this gets flipped upside down. The locks get put in position. That gets positioned over and snapped down onto it. This is now basically one piece. Now stuff will come rainbowing out of it, so try to avoid that. Position this over the frame rails. walk this up inside. Now, there's something we found out about this that you got to be careful about, is that one, it's got to be an R, and two, you better make sure that this arm got up, this arm right here got up inside of the slide. All right, once you do that, then you just keep running it forward and tucking it all in until it goes forward like that, and then make sure that the locked, right? And then we got to be in fire. Okay. All right. That's being held open. That doesn't feel right. There you go. That's held open, and that's supposed to be all the way shut. So I think some of the springs have to work their way down into this. If you run that up on safe like that, you get nothing. Oh, I know what it was too. We're going to try this, all right? Come back, come off safe, drop. That hangs, right? There we go. So let me put the grips back on this thing, because it's a little bit of a pain in the neck to grab. Okay. All right. My first time inside of a Schnellführer, there were a lot of things in here that were different, and I don't go in and out of C96s very often, much less M30s. So, yeah, this was an uncomfortable experience for me, and it should be an uncomfortable experience for you, because God only knows what this thing is worth. What did you say? Whew, now I know what it's worth. Okay, I just got whispered in my ear. We're going to leave it at that. Not my gun, and we're not going to talk too much about it. All right, good deal. All right, let's go outside and shoot this thing, because I would really like to make sure that it passes all of its safety checks and that it works. And eventually, God, would I love to take this thing out, set it to 900 meters, and get it on a half-a-mile run and go ahead and shoot it. How many arshins is that? Well, here we go. After a comprehensive strip and cleaning, we've had the gun apart. Now, we didn't do any work on the actual fire control system. However, I got 3 rounds loaded in a mag here, and we're just going to make sure that this thing will stop, or that it'll even feed around in the first place. We've got it set to N, and we'll just see if we can get a round off. It ejected. The gun stopped. I got my finger. It did not fully feed, though. We may have an issue here with this mag. Okay. One more. Now it came shut. So sometimes when you put stuff together, you don't really know whether or not you got all of the inequalities worked out of it or not. Okay. So, got another mag. We have one up the pipe. We're going to select the R feature here and see what that looks like. That's pretty cool. And then we can go with this feature here, which is the shoulder stock. I'd say that's a success. So on that basis, I can now return this to the customer and let them know that not only does it work in single, it works in full. And well, at the end of the day, that's pretty cool. And as always, it has been a pleasure.